Great, so thank you guys for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk to you about machine intelligence. And I wanted to take a little bit of a different lens than everyone else has taken today, just because you've heard it. So we've heard a lot of people talk about what this is doing to transform different verticals, and that's very near and dear to my heart, and I invest a lot in that. We've seen what it's doing to transform the life of the technical user, but what I really wanted to focus on, since a lot of you are really technical and maybe don't use the business user tools, is kind of show you a snapshot of how machine intelligence is transforming an individual's workday, and a completely non-technical individual. So it's not trying to make the business user a data scientist, but it's trying to just create a tool that's so magical that a lot of the machine intelligence is just embedded within it to solve a specific business problem with a very neat and clean UI. And so who am I? My name's Shivon Zilis. I work for an early stage venture capital fund called Bloomberg Beta. And our fund exists primarily to invest in companies that are transforming the future of work. And so just by way of background, I'm a little bit of a different VC. So a lot of VCs, it's, Ben was joking at me earlier. He's like, oh, it's the networking break. You have to go outside. You got to meet people and have coffee. I'm this super geek VC. So I spend a lot of my time just kind of falling in love with different technology areas, researching them to death. So finding every company, speaking to everybody I can speak to, creating sort of these deep thesis areas, and then investing in those areas. And so, why am I obsessed and investing in machine intelligence? And so the answer to that question really dates back to not why machine intelligence, but why big data. So about 4 years ago, I became obsessed with what data was doing to transform the world. What I did at that time, that term big data was floating around, but it wasn't super well known yet. It was really confusing to figure out the ecosystem. And so I did what I do, which is look at hundreds of companies and compute a landscape just to kind of make sense of everything that was happening in the big data world. And so I did that for a couple of years, created some thesis areas. We made a ton of investments in 2013 and 2014, probably have about 25 big data and machine learning companies in our portfolio at this point. But what I realized was I had fallen in love and become obsessed with this new piece of the puzzle that didn't fit within my big data paradigm. And so in general, when we're talking about big data, we're talking about storing, processing, and accessing data. And what I had fallen in love with was, that piece was necessary. It was a cornerstone. We'll continue to invest in it. But where I was naturally spending my time was in the insights, and in particular the insights that were coming as a result of automating the process through learning algorithms. And so to kind of abstract this one level up, the way we think about it is that big data is the what. It's the cornerstone. There is no machine intelligence without big data, but machine intelligence is very much the so what, so the insights at the end of the day. And so what I did is, when I fell in love with machine intelligence is what I always do. So I researched the heck out of every company I could find, and I tried to put together a taxonomy because I just found the ecosystem very, very confusing. And so what I came up with was this, and you might say, how does this make this less confusing, Shivon? This is complete visual overload, and you'd be entirely right. But the whole point here, the two things I want you to take away from this right now, and I'll get back into this chart sort of at the end of the talk, is there's a heck of a lot going on. If you think this is visual overload, this is probably a 5 to 10% snapshot of what's actually happening in the machine intelligence ecosystem. And the other piece of it that you can see is, it's transforming enterprise industries and sort of humans fundamentally alike. And one of the things that I realized, and this is kind of getting into a meta-level point, is when I did my big data research and I composed a chart very much similar to that chart, but just within the realm of big data, what did I do? I went to Google, I put in every keyword I could find, I found probably hundreds of companies, maybe 300 or 400. It was a super painful process, so it took me 6 months, and I really just used Google and Excel and anything I could hack together to put it together. Fast forward to doing this machine intelligence landscape about 6 months ago, I was able to uncover thousands of companies very quickly. It took me half the time, and I learned probably 10 times as much. And the reason I was able to do that, ironically enough, is because I used a whole bunch of machine intelligence tools to research machine intelligence. And so, again, getting super meta. But that led me to back up into my day and how machine intelligence is transforming not just my deep research projects, but the rest of my day. And I was kind of astounded when I thought about it, because I'm like, gosh, if I walk through each piece of my day, there's really nothing left now versus 2 years ago that hasn't been completely transformed by machine intelligence, which led me to the kind of concerning conclusion that I might be a cyborg. No, not really. There may be an on-off switch here. Maybe someone can find it later. But I'm definitely not a cyborg yet, I don't think, but what this makes me think about too, and just kind of to frame me going through my day in these tools, is we're not talking about some dystopian future, and when people say artificial intelligence, it's like, oh, 20 years in the future, crazy things, robots. What I'm actually talking about is how business users, and this is a very aspirational picture of me, how I'm using machine intelligence to give myself wings and superpowers through the day. And so let's quickly walk through one of my days. So my days look a lot like a lot of business users who are using intelligence tools. My job is essentially to meet a whole bunch of different people in a whole bunch of different topic areas and become an expert very quickly when I really don't have a ton of time. And so it's 9 a.m. I've got a meeting. I look at my calendar. I've got a meeting at 10 a.m. It's actually kind of a cool meeting. It's an entrepreneur who's using computer vision technologies to power self-driving car applications. I'm like, all right, that's pretty cool. So I've done a bunch of this computer vision research, but gosh, I haven't actually looked at self-driving cars in the last 4 months. And so, I've got about half an hour to get up to speed really quickly before I have to hop in a cab and meet this entrepreneur. And so in the old days, what I would have done was Google, look at the first couple of pages of results, and just kind of hope that I was up to speed. But now we can do better. So, what I use in this case is a visual search tool. And what this provides me versus what a Google provides me is comprehensiveness of a conversation. So I can visually see everything that's happened in the last 4 months and kind of know with certainty that, okay, I'm up to speed on every single major conversation that's happened. So I'm going to show you a quick screenshot just to illustrate it, and before I show it to you, I just want to explain that basically what I asked the tool to do was read the top 10,000 articles in self-driving cars over the last 4 months and cluster it into different discussion topics for me. And so I'm delivering on my promise of visual overload again. So, but what I want you to look at here is not necessarily the layout of the network, but just abstract back and just look at the individual colors. So you can see probably about 14 distinct colors up there, and those colors represent to me the different discussion topics and areas. And so instead of a Google where I'm kind of haphazardly going through links, I can actually just grab onto these individual discussion areas and do a deep dive. And so if we take the turquoise cluster, basically what you're seeing here is Apple has made some sort of announcement that they're getting into the electric car industry and they're taking Tesla head on. Okay, well that's one article about that. What do we see that's sort of more broadly into the discussion topic? Well, it looks like these cars are actually outfitted with cameras and a whole bunch of different sensors. So I guess it's probably the case that Apple's going to be, if they're building an electric car, is probably going to be trying to build a self-driving car. So moving on to the next category, this is essentially the topic of Google versus Uber. And so it's clustered every single article that's been announced as a sort of back and forth has happened where Uber was reliant on Google for powering maps and potential self-driving car technologies in the future. That was until Google decided, okay, wait, Uber's a pretty damn good business. We probably want to move into this ecosystem ourselves, which you can see one of the articles up there shows you that Uber has actually inked a self-driving car technology agreement with Carnegie Mellon University to build their own self-driving car. And so I won't take you through everything else, but if you look at the different colors down there, what we can see just at a quick glance is that, well, a self-driving car has driven across the country. Mercedes-Benz, Honda, Hyundai have jumped in, a bunch of the major car manufacturers. But there are other things that you may not realize. NVIDIA is a GPU company. They've actually announced that they have a deep learning platform that powers self-driving car applications. And then further down the list, which I'm not going to show you, you get into a whole bunch of crazy esoteric things like there are fan clubs devoted to the cutest self-driving cars, which admittedly are super, super cute. And so I go through this in about 20 minutes, and I feel pretty confident that I'm going to walk into this meeting and know all of the major discussion topics around self-driving cars. All right, so it's 10 a.m., I'm meeting this entrepreneur, but how did that meeting even get scheduled? So as you can see for me, I'm pretty young, I'm early in my career. I don't actually have an assistant yet, but I have to take sometimes 40 or 50 meetings a week. How do I actually schedule that? And so I'm lucky enough that we're in a time where we actually have algorithmic assistants that are taking a lot of the heavy lifting of scheduling away. And so the way this essentially works is I'll take an email, someone requests a meeting, I'll forward it onto the service. What that service is able to do is it's able to parse out who on the thread do I want to meet? Do I want that to be an in-person or a phone call? And how urgent is this meeting? And what it will then do is it knows my calendar, it knows my preferences, it will perform that matching game. And so in terms of these services, Some of them are almost entirely algorithmic. Some of them are heavily templated, but keep a human in the loop just so you can ensure that the ball doesn't drop, because scheduling can be kind of a complex game. And so I save hours and hours just based on that. But the kind of really interesting upside for me in this as well is there's an actual emotional advantage that comes into play when I use these algorithmic assistants. And so I don't know if you can tell by my accent, but I'm a Canadian. We have a reputation for being a little bit overly accommodating at times. And so when I think I'm a fairly intelligent person, but when I schedule myself, I end up doing this kind of crazy run all over the city, burn 3 hours just because you weren't smart enough to schedule yourself and you just wanted to be accommodating. Whereas these algorithmic assistants, and I'm just giving you an example of a back and forth here, I use assistants named Amy and Clara. They're different technologies. This is an example where Amy's having a back and forth on behalf of her client, Michael, with, I think it's with John. And John wants Michael to meet at his office, but luckily, Amy is ornery enough to be like, nope, you're gonna meet at Michael's office. And so that's what the assistant does for me is, it performs the ornery function and kind of allows me to be sort of on my turf with sort of an intelligent transportation schedule. So this probably saves me on the order of 6 or 7 hours a week. And again, it's something I pay little or no money for. And so the meetings happen now, and I'm actually really jazzed about this entrepreneur and the technology, but the one thing they mentioned to me, it's like, okay, well, self-driving cars is one application, but at our core, we're a computer vision technology that can be applied to, other types of moving objects. And so I'm curious, because I really like this entrepreneur, but I don't really know what the competitive landscape looks like. And so I'll do a whole bunch of things at this point to kind of quickly get up to speed, realize, is this a hot market or not? The first bit is hop back into the visual search tool. In this case, I'm querying company databases as opposed to news. And I'm just asking it, show me what the entire computer vision landscape looks like. So you can see the things, again, getting meta, visual search is a piece of it itself. There are AI social applications, gaming, you've got your augmented reality, you've got your medical. But then if you look at the far right, it's kind of to find out the pieces that I really like, which is the industrial pieces and the fleet management pieces. And so I'm going to spend my time in there figuring out where this particular company fits into the competitive landscape. The other thing I realize is as a VC, I'm looking at thousands of companies a year. I'm pretty good at getting snapshots, but the thing that's really, really hard is how do you track a story over time? And so what I tend to use is there are a whole bunch of companies that perform analyses like this. What they're doing is they're looking at the diffs across time in terms of all the publicly available data for a whole bunch of different companies. So they understand which companies are growing in headcount, what products they're releasing, how many people are talking about them, is that sentiment good and bad, and what it can do is compute growth scores for me. And so that's super useful from the perspective of understanding, okay, well, where is diff bought today versus 3 months ago, but it's also useful just because there are certain industries that have excellent growth scores and certain ones that don't. So I can pick whether or not computer vision, it's the right time to invest in that industry or not. And so now it's 2 o'clock, I have to hop on a conference call. Do any of you have to take conference calls for work? Hands up. Now keep your hand up if you actually like taking conference calls. No. So, well, I'm guessing. I personally hate conference calls. But the reason I hate conference calls, for the most part, is there's just so much knowledge that's lost. And what I end up doing on a call is taking chicken scratch notes, or at very best taking email notes. But there's a whole lot that just goes. I can't remember what my colleagues said 6 months ago on a call about self-driving cars. And so what we see now is we see machine transcription technologies. They're not quite good enough to do full-form documents, but these technologies are super early. We're just demoing them right now. But what they can do is they're pretty good at picking out individual sentences. But what they're really good at is understanding which sentences in your conversation were actually important or not. So now I get machinized minutes and this intelligent artifact of the call that I do that's fully searchable. And I can do things now if I have 6 months of call history that I can just type in self-driving car and see everything that everyone said within the realm of self-driving cars. All right, so now it's 3 o'clock. I'm doing what a lot of people are concerned about doing, which is finding new talent for our team. And I've agonized at writing a job description. Honestly, I think the job description sucks, but I don't know. It's just, I'm not an expert with job descriptions. And so, I wish I had some way to know how good my job description is relative to everything else in the market. And so luckily there are a few of these technologies across different domains. The way to think about it is essentially spell check 2.0. So what spell check was to correcting your documents for linguistic rules. This is for everything else, which includes domain-specific knowledge. So what this technology in particular has done is it's looked at thousands and thousands of job postings. It knows what's good, it knows what's bad, and I copy and pasted our actual job description in here, and lo and behold, my worst fears are realized. I am below average. And so if you ever want to motivate me, just call me below average. I will probably change my behavior very, very quickly. But what this is able to tell me is it tells me, I'm doing some things right, but I'm doing some things wrong. And the really interesting thing is if you look at the bottom, there's actually a gender bias to my job description that I have written that skews towards males. And so as a woman in tech, I really want to fix that. And so how do I do that? So first, you can see the rainbow of words on the right. The red words are ones that just don't really work. Candidates don't really like them. And so I've used that word candidate, and it turns out that's very sterile, and I should actually use a word like you so the person can actually visualize themselves in the role. And so what I do is I go through the entire document and I choose and make better word choices across it based on suggestions. And here there's actually just a statement that's missing. Of course we're an equal opportunity employer, but I've neglected to write that in because I don't really write a lot of job descriptions. And so the system inputs that for me. At the end of 20 minutes, I'm now in 97th percentile. It tells me I'm outstanding. The data says I'm outstanding. I'm happy. I can kind of get on with my day from there. And so we get to the end of my day, and I've got end of day emails. And so, in venture, like a lot of you, you end up with hundreds and hundreds of emails by the end of the day. My question to myself is, how do I just not drop the ball on a lot of what's happening right now? And so Priority Inbox tends to look at your contacts and which ones are important, but I use a bunch of different tools that do slightly different things. And this is just one example of one, which all it does is it tells me, here are all your unanswered questions. Here's where you actually have dropped the ball or at risk of dropping the ball, and you need to answer them right now. So I do that, and I think the people around me are happy for it because I'm a happier person going into the evening. And so quickly to wrap up here, if you're at all moved by the fact that machine intelligence is actually making a tangible difference in the lives of the individual, whether it's a data scientist or a business user, my argument would be if we kind of zoom back out, if we look at teams, companies, and industries, that transformation is going to be orders of magnitude greater. And the last point I'm going to make, kind of getting back to the chart here, and so, a lot of what I showed you actually isn't using particularly complex machine intelligence technologies. You didn't hear me say the words deep learning or convolutional neural networks. That just hasn't come up. It's actually fairly rudimentary technologies that are just packaged into a very neat UI. But if you look at that top layer there, that's where the really exciting stuff has happened. And that stuff hasn't even touched industry yet. So as much as machine intelligence is transforming pretty much every industry vertical, every enterprise function, we're about to see sort of this massive refresh in the next couple of years. So I think we're really just sort of at the tip of the iceberg here. And I'm excited to keep investing in it. I was going to share a little bit about sort of what we look for in machine intelligence technologies as an investor, but I've run out of time here, so if you're interested, feel free to grab me after, and I'll keep you up to speed. But thank you so much for having me. It was exciting to share machine intelligence with you.